everyone, my name is Elaine, and today I'm going to be both summarizing and reviewing the 12th book in Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, Witches Abroad, starting with the summary. A woman seeks the reflection of another in a mirror. A group of witches meet atop Bear Mountain. Desiderata Hollow, witch and fairy godmother, knows that she's going to die and begins writing her will. Lilith, another fairy godmother, speaks to her via mirror, reminding Desiderata that she is lost. Death comes for Desiderata, who begins speaking of her experience with Lilith, how the woman has become ruler of Genua. Desiderata explains that she has to send 3 people to Genua to defeat Lilith in her stead. One of them is Esme Weatherwax. Death claims Desiderata. With Desiderata dying, Lilith realizes that nothing stands in the way of her happy ending. The witches talk about how they're short-handed now that Desiderata has died, and wonder who should take over her territory. Margaret becomes a topic of discussion. Granny and Nanny decide to go and see to Desiderata's cottage together. Herker, the poacher who buries Desiderata, is instructed to deliver a package and an envelope, without peeking at their contents. In a note Desiderata left for him, or something bad will happen. Lilith searches for something in a mirror. Nanny and Granny look for something in Desiderata's house. Granny smashes Desiderata's mirror. Lilith is surprised. Herker delivers the package and note to Margaret. It states that she has become the replacement since the writer never had time to train another, and that she must go to Genua. Ella Saturday is not to marry the prince. Very important. The old biddies aren't supposed to come. They'll only ruin everything. The package was Desiderata's magic wand. Margaret realizes she is a fairy godmother. Granny is quite shaken by what she had seen in the mirror. Margaret arrives at Desiderata's cottage. She explains that she was given the wand. The others, especially Granny, are not happy. Granny reads the note. She plans to set out for Genua with the others the following day and buries the only mirror in her house when she arrives home. After making the preparations, the witches depart. Nanny takes Grebo with them. The witches enter a dwarven mine where there's been a cave-in. Margaret uses the wand to turn the shell covering the trapped miners into pumpkins, allowing them to escape. She hadn't intended to make the shell pumpkins. It's just all she can do with the wand right now. The dwarves lead the witches to a boat and give them some food. The boat should guide them over the river that cuts through the mountain to Genua. The witches continue their journey. The water begins to get choppy. Margaret turns the boat into a pumpkin with the wand just before they head over a waterfall. Lilith speaks to the Duke she created. She tells him not to worry about the witches. They'll be drawn into the story. He will also get her because of the story. All he needs to do is kiss her at the right time. Margaret manages to retrieve everything but Granny's bag from the river. The witches continue their travels by broom. They stop for the night in a sad, frightened little town where all the people act a bit strange and have lots of garlic-flavored food and garlic hanging everywhere. Grebo captures a bat. Mrs. Pleasant informs Mrs. Gogol, the voodoo woman, whom Lilith has locked up. Mrs. Gogol tells Mrs. Pleasant that 3 women are coming with a cat. Mrs. Pleasant's instructed to lead them to her. Margaret has a dream in which someone who looks like Granny smiles at her from within a mirror. The people of the town begin celebrating. The witches leave the town and continue on their journey. In the next town, the witches refuse to come inside for the thing with the bulls, where they're chased through the streets by a group of men. The witches were enjoying their meal after all. Margaret takes the rosette off the lead bull. The village celebrates a flower festival the following year. While traveling by boat, Granny reads one of Desiderata's books and discovers that if anything can be done, it'll be on Samedi Nuit Mort, the final night of Carnival, the night halfway between the living and the dead, when magic flows in the streets. If Elle is vulnerable, it is then, for Carnival is everything she hates. That's on page 110. Granny's confidence declines as they draw closer and closer to Genua. Granny finds out that Nanny lost the vast majority of their money in her broom gambling. Granny intends to get it back with what little they have left. Granny uses headology to win all of the money Nanny lost back, as well as some extra in Nanny's broom. When Granny is finished, the group leaves the riverboat by broom. The witches happen across an overgrown castle. It's dusty and filled with sleeping people. Nanny throws the spinning wheel in the princess's room out the window. Breaking the spell, the princess awakens and seems to recognize Granny. Granny decides that instead of resting, she wants the group to depart immediately after she notices a mirror in the princess's room. The group is forced to flee when they are attacked by guards. The whole castle seems to recognize Esme, who swears they've never seen her before. The witches head through a forest. Nanny and Margaret sense that Granny is hiding something from them. The witches stumble across a girl in a red hood. Granny and Nanny go on ahead to check on her grandmother. Granny and Nanny are invited inside the grandmother's house. They send the girl's grandmother and Grebo into the attic. Esme can feel the stories. She knows someone is producing them. Nanny knows Granny knows who it is, about the mirrors, but Granny won't say anything just in case she's wrong. When the wolf strolls in, Granny knocks it out by hitting it on the head with a cast iron frying pan. The witches drag the wolf outside. Granny explores its mind, its 2 minds going mad. Someone had tried to make the wolf believe it was human. A woodcutter arrives. He chops off the wolf's head. The wolf is buried. Granny punishes the head woodcutter by making him look after Red's grandmother and build her a new cottage for failing to speak to the wolf or tend to the grandmother's needs sooner. The witches leave the cottage in the woodcutter's hands. Margaret had heard from one of them that a lot of weird things had been happening in the forest. More fairy tales. Granny admits that someone's been here before us, passing through. Someone who knows about the power of stories and uses them, and the stories have kind of hung around. That's on page 156. Granny claims it was for practice. When Granny refuses to say anything further, she gets into a fight with Margaret and they cease speaking to one another. The witches begin walking the yellow brick road to Genua. A farmhouse falls on Nanny. Some dwarves arrive to take Nanny's red boots. They had expected her to be dead. The shoes aren't handed over. Lilith doesn't feel like anyone can stop her story in Genua. She sends 2 sisters to a house with a mission. The witches continue to Genua by broom. Margaret senses that in Genua, stories came to life. In Genua, someone set out to make dreams come true. That's on page 171. The witches arrive in Genua. It's very clean and quiet and filled with guards. The witches are amazed that no one recognizes them as witches and there don't seem to be any other witches about. Margaret decides that she doesn't need help and wants to do things on her own. She leaves the others when she thinks they're asleep and heads to a house. Granny watches the beheading of a thief. She senses 2 non-human minds in the crowd. She realizes that the witches are in charge of Genua. Margaret meets Ella, who is surprised Margaret is her fairy godmother. Granny follows the 2 non-human women to a dilapidated house. Nanny meets Mrs. Pleasant, the cook, at the palace. The pair go for a stroll. They walk through the market. Eventually, Nanny loses Mrs. Pleasant and heads into a nearby tent. Nanny meets Mrs. Gogol. Nanny knows something is wrong with Genua. Granny enters the tent soon after. The group heads to Mrs. Gogol's shack. The door opens. Margaret is led to the kitchen. Ella, aka Emberella or Embers, informs Margaret that she won't go to the ball or marry the prince. He makes her uncomfortable. It's all been arranged. My other godmother says I've got to do it. She says it's my destiny. That's on page 209. Ella wonders which godmother Margaret is, the good or the bad one, and Margaret is surprised to hear there is another. As Mrs. Gogol's zombie, Saturday, feeds them gumbo, the ladies discuss how the Baron was poisoned by the Duke. The Baron had a daughter, whom Nanny suspects the Duke wishes to marry to solidify his rule. Mrs. Gogol wants justice, what's hers back, and her stopped. Granny admits that her sister is behind everything. Her sister is the one Mrs. Gogol wants stopped. Margaret says Ella doesn't have to marry anyone she doesn't want to. Ella is convinced that she does. Granny tells the others about her sister, Lily. Their mother had kicked her out when they were 13 for being wanton and using magic on people. She's bossy and vain and in charge of Genua. Margaret asserts that Ella doesn't have to go to the ball. Margaret is rescued from the 2 sisters, really snakes, by her elder witches. Granny promises they'll come back for Ella when the time is right. Granny says they've got to talk about stories. Lily is using them. The stories collect around here because here's where they find a way out. She feeds them. She don't want your Ella to marry that Duke man because of politics or something. That's just an explanation. It's not a reason. She wants the girl to marry the prince because that's what the story demands. That's on page 228. And she's the Wicked Witch, the fairy godmother, in the center of it all, the most important person who's feeding people to the stories. Samedi nuit mort arrives. Mrs. Gogol and Saturday know this is their time. They head to the clearing and hope Ella will soon rule. Nanny gets the footman drunk. Margaret begins to cut Ella's dress into tiny pieces. Margaret turns the coach into a pumpkin, and the witches free the horses in order to stop the story. The witches attend the festivities to keep an eye on things. Lilith performs some magic. Granny can't enjoy the fun. She feels like everything was too easy. Margaret reminds her elders that there are 2 godmothers. The witches hurry up the street. They watch a coach go by and know they need to do something. The witches turn Grebo into a human. Nanny instructs Grebo to stop the coach. Grebo stops the coach. Ella is sent to the swamp. Margaret is going to take her place at the ball, and her elder witches will accompany her. Margaret, Death, and Grebo enter the ball one after the other. Nanny and Granny stumble across the Duke's bedroom. It has no bed, lots of green, and is filled with flies. There's also a round wooden cover on the floor. The witches open the cover. They're appalled by what they find inside. Granny realizes there's more than one story here. Lily's letting several happen all at the same time. That's on page 264. Nanny wants to put an end to it and rescue poor Margaret. The witches steal the clothes of 2 women roughly the same size as they are. Granny and Nanny make their way into the ball. Margaret dances. Granny dances with Colonel Moutard. Nanny Og is approached by Casanunda, reputed to be the Discworld's greatest lover. The dance continues until the Duke and Lily stroll in. It gradually resumes. Margaret and the Duke begin dancing together. Granny is dismayed she can't figure out where to stop the story. Nanny tampers with the clock. Margaret removes the 2 pieces of smoked glass from the Duke's eyes and begins to really see him. She flees from the ball and into the night. Margaret loses a shoe during her departure. The Duke retrieves it. Granny takes the mirror slipper from him and smashes it on the ground. The story shakes and tries to recover. Mrs. Gogol invests Saturday, the former ruler of Genua, with power. The sisters appear before Margaret. Lily and Granny meet. Granny is convinced she has broken the story. The Snake Sisters drag Margaret back to the ball. Lily knows that Granny's efforts can't stop the story. The Duke puts the remaining slipper on Margaret. It kind of fits. Lily realizes that Margaret has replaced Ella when Granny comments about the extra socks. Nanny tries the slipper on next. It fits perfectly. Nanny and Granny reveal that the Duke lives in a pond because he's a frog. Lily snaps her fingers, freezing everyone but the witches so they can talk. The witches are hung up on the fact that the Duke is a frog, that Lily killed the old Baron. Lily explains that the princess's kiss will seal the spell and keep the frog from reverting into its previous state every night. Lily wants to make Genua into a fine city. Granny notes that Ella doesn't want to marry the Duke. The sisters just can't agree on anything. Who should rule? What's best for Genua? Lily decides that she is going to lock the witches up until the story is over so they can't interfere fear. She expects them to escape, though. Ella reaches Mrs. Gogol's hut. Mrs. Gogol moves it farther into the river for safety. Granny tries to pick their cell's lock. Saturday frees the witches from their cell. Grieber rescues the witches from the guards who pursue them. The witches head for the hall. Saturday interrupts the party. The Duke tries to have him killed. Again. Lily fights Saturday before fleeing. Mrs. Gogol arrives at the ball with Ella. Granny says that Ella should rule and she should receive no further magical aid. Ella should sort things out for herself going forward. Mrs. Gogol is hesitant to agree, and she definitely does not want to leave Lily to Granny. Granny begins to walk away so she can find her sister. Mrs. Gogol unleashes her voodoo upon Granny. Granny uses headology to get Mrs. Gogol to light her own voodoo doll on fire. Granny continues on her way. Margaret and Nanny follow after her. The prince is dead. Ella takes the throne. Ella is surprised. She has gone from servant to ruler. Ella ends the ball. Baron Saturday is disappointed he didn't get his revenge. Death claims him. Mrs. Gogol, Ella's mother, returns to the swamp. Nanny and Margaret encounter the Snake Sisters in the corridor. Margaret knocks one out with a punch and the other by clubbing it with her wand. Lily hides in her nest of mirrors atop a tower. Granny invites her to come back home with the other witches. Lily declines. Nanny and Margaret appear. Lily makes Margaret float and threatens to drop her. To her death. Lily wants to change the story again. She wants the witches to go away. Granny says she will say she lost if Lily puts Margaret down. Lily doesn't believe her. Granny proves she wasn't lying. She announces that her sister has won, that there's nothing she can do, and leaps off the tower with her broom in hand. Nanny and Margaret run to check on her. Nanny announces they'll be back before they disappear. Nanny and Margaret pass Death on their way down the tower and decide to turn around. Lily enters the place between the mirrors. Granny shatters one of Lily's mirrors. Lily is horrified because it has brought imbalance. Granny wants to make her sister pay for everything. Lily's reflection reaches out of its frame, toward Lily. All of Lily's mirrors shatter. Nanny and Margaret find Granny, lying in a pile of broken glass. It looks like she had been trying to reach through the glass. Margaret is sent to see if Mrs. Gogol can help heal Esme. Nanny begins to tend to Esme's wounds. Lily meets death. She's trapped inside a mirror, neither dead nor alive. Lily learns that she can escape when you find the one that's real. That's on page 333. Lily begins darting through her reflections. Nanny, Margaret, and Mrs. Gogol tend to Granny in the palace. Granny is trapped in a mirror. She's told the same thing her sister was by Death. Granny figures out that she's the real one immediately and escapes. Margaret throws the wand into the river. The witches take the long way home. And that's the end of the book. Now, on to my book review. In Witches Abroad, Pratchett uses postmodernism to deconstruct, satirize, and exaggerate several of the stereotypes and unrealistic tropes found in fantasy, fairy tales, folklore, etc. I appreciated how Pratchett incorporated fairy tales into his novel specifically, but sometimes it felt like the novel was a bunch of little stories as opposed to one big story. At the same time, it made the novel feel even more fast-paced than it already is because there are so many mini-stories within the bigger story. Pratchett refers to the Duke as both a prince and as a duke. Which is it? These titles have different degrees of power, and using both terms was confusing. And why is the Baron's daughter considered both a princess and just a Baron's daughter, whatever the term for that is? Very confusing. I really like Granny as a character even though she can be mean, especially to Margaret. I appreciate her because she's badass. She can glare and or stare people into submission. Use headology to get into people's heads and win the day. Outsmart and reason her way out of just about any situation. Nanny is also hilarious, while Margaret is kind of just there. I definitely don't feel as though she contributes or gets a chance to contribute as much to the story as the elder pair of witches, and I don't find her new agey vegetarian witch personality as intriguing as those of the older witches. So overall, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 star rating. It was a very strong Pratchett novel, and I really do appreciate the novels that incorporate this trio of witches. And there you have it, my summary and review of Terry Pratchett's Witches Abroad, the 12th novel in the Discworld series. If you like what you saw here today, please leave a comment down below. Let me know not only what you thought of my review, but what you thought of this book and any of the others in the Discworld that you have read. Smash that like button until it's blue. Subscribe, ring that bell so you know what's up, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye, guys!